Hey team, and welcome back to the channel. So welcome. Today we're going to talk about the astrological magic election opportunities that we're going to have from the Pisces New Moon until our Aries Solar Eclipse. Thankfully we actually have a decent amount to get us going, which should help us kind of dealing with these eclipses that we have coming, both the lunar eclipse in the middle of the month and then the solar eclipse happening later towards the end of the month. But before we dive into that, one thing that I wanted to say is that, you probably noticed for a few months now, I haven't really been uploading like full moon videos to YouTube, and that's because I've primarily been uploading them into the Patreon. And I've done that for a few reasons, but one of the big ones was because I got tired, so tired, of having to deal with YouTube's like censorship or with like copyright infringement stuff for like sharing 30-second clips of like movies or TV series to make a point. And so that's the main reason why I moved a lot of that stuff to Patreon. Because one of the things that I like talking about the most when it comes to astrology is like astrological ideas as they come across in media, or even like astrological magic ideas as they come out in media. I just think that's very fascinating. It's something that I enjoy spending time talking about and diving into, and then of course sharing. So a lot of those videos they start out as like Patreon only, but then they become free a few months later. And one of the first ones that I did several months ago was relationship horror significators as pop music duets. And that one is now free to go view. So I really recommend going and checking that out if that sounds at all interesting to you, to kind of see like what it is that I'm doing, and then maybe subscribe to the Patreon to see some of the others, or just kind of keep an eye out for when more recent ones become available for everyone else to see. But I just wanted to mention that. Oh, and then also on Patreon, we've started a series of Ficino Fridays, where it's a weekly thing where every Friday we talk about a new chapter of Marsilio Ficino's 3 books on life, which I maintain is the superior astrological magic kind of core text to the more famous, unfortunately more famous Picatrix. So, if that's something that you'd be interested in kind of following along with as well, please go and check that out too. But anyway, enough about that. Let's go ahead and dive into our astrological elections for this month. And we actually have a decent amount to work with, which is really great. Because like I said, we do have those eclipses coming, which can be very difficult, especially lunar eclipses, for people to kind of maneuver, especially if in your natal chart the eclipse is heightened or highlighted in any way. So hopefully these elections can help give you some talismans to help you work with or work through whatever sort of issue the eclipses might be signifying for you, or just to kind of ride out the general chaos is the word. I feel like chaos is too nice of a word, too polite of a word to use for everything going on. But yeah, hopefully to get you through that. But let's go ahead and get started. And our first electional opportunity, sort of right out the gate, is for the third lunar mansion. And the third lunar mansion, of course, is one of my absolute favorite mansions, probably is my absolute favorite mansion. One of the earliest mansions that I had positive experiences with, that sort of solidified my confidence in the astrological magic system and kind of started me on this whole thing. So that's my villain origin story, I guess, with astrological magic. And the third lunar mansion, one of the main reasons why I appreciate and like to work with it, is because it's just generally very powerfully positive. It's for the text say it's like for the acquisition of all good things, and that's really awesome because this idea of like all good things is very flexible. So it's something that can be kind of applied to a whole bunch of different situations that you might be struggling with or dealing with, or want some help in, or some like reward or payback in, kind of a thing. Payback made it sound very sinister now that I think about it, but just something that you want some help with. So third lunar mansion lover, got a mirror for her right here that you probably can kind of barely see, but yeah, love it to death. I really recommend working with it, especially if you're new to astrological magic, or if there's like a particular thing that you want, but you kind of struggle to find another mansion that more specifically is able to kind of accomplish that thing. The third lunar mansion will take care of it. So starting out with the North American version of the third lunar mansion talisman, this takes place on March 3rd at 14:21, so just around 2:30 p.m. And the main thing that we're focused on here is you've got the moon in the third mansion in the 10th house here. And she's applying the sextile to the sun. With the third lunar mansion, you want the moon to apply to a planet that is generally considered beneficent. That can generally be like associated with like giving. So this is going to be like Jupiter is probably your first bet. Venus and the Sun are probably your top. That's kind of your top three. Mercury, Saturn, and Mars less so. Maybe in specific circumstances, if something that you're after is kind of like explicitly Saturn coded or ruled by Mars, kind of a thing. In those instances, I think connections with those planets can be very helpful. But the kind of general giving powers of the Sun, Jupiter, and Venus make great sort of baseline, generic, kind of like anybody can use these sort of for any kind of purpose. Moon connections for the third mansion. At this time, we're gonna hold on to, we're gonna cling for to dear life for this to this late Cancer ascendant. And the reason why we want to do that is because I felt a little uncomfortable with the sun, with the Leo sun ruled ascendant, just because they've got this conjunction happening with Saturn, which is about 8 degrees at this time. And I use a 7.5 plus 4 degree orb for the sun and Saturn, which is like 12.5, I think. 7.5 plus 4. Yeah, 12.5 degrees. So that's within that orb. So I'm a little about it. But if you think 8 degrees is wide enough for a Sun Saturn Sun Saturn conjunction, then feel free to dip into the Leo sign, and that'll at least let you get the moon closer to the midheaven. But instead, we're going to cling to Cancer, and that's going to bring us to the moon as the ruler of the ascendant. And the moon's doing fine. She's not in a bad aspect with Saturn or Mars. She's not, of course, going to bust the sun, and the ascendant degree isn't either. So all in all, it's a pretty good option for the third lunar mansion. It's important that the moon is waxing in the chart, that kind of thing. But this is a good North American version to work with. For the Western European and Northern African version of this chart, it's going to take place on March 3rd at about 9 in the morning, 8:56. And here we're going to have the moon in the third mansion conjoin the ascendant, still applying the sextile to the sun. It's a bit wide here. It's about 14 degrees, which is not ideal. We would want that to be a little bit closer like it was in the North American version, where it was about like, I forget, 8-9 degrees apart. Who can say? If only I could flip back. If only I could flip back and look at that chart. But until we develop that technology, I guess we're done. Yeah, about 7 degrees apart. So that 7 degrees is more normal, more what we want. But the this 14 degrees is a lot. So we have this kind of gap here. That's not super fun, but we're going to deal with it. And the wider the aspect between the moon and the next planet that she's applying to is, the longer it can take for the talisman to start to manifest effects. So just kind of a thing to keep an eye on. It doesn't make it bad per se. It doesn't make it worse, I guess. It doesn't make the effects worse, but it just kind of like takes a bit more effort to make it kind of happen. We have to wait a little bit longer. So I guess in some ways that is like that is like objectively a worse kind of thing, right? Like objectively that is worse. Having to wait longer for something is objectively worse, but it doesn't make it like the effects worse, if that makes sense. So we've got the sextile to the sun still, which is really great. And that is, like I said, the sun, Jupiter, Venus, those are the planets that we want the moon to apply to. The ruler of the ascendant, and this is going to be Mars, and it's fine that Mars is in Cancer. It's not terrible. I mean, Mars doesn't like to be in Cancer, but insofar as like talismanic construction, it doesn't bother me a lot that the ruler of the first is in a sign it doesn't do well in. What I don't like is for the ruler of the first to be afflicted by another planet. I don't like accidental afflictions. I think those are a bit more difficult to handle. So like afflictions by like being retrograde, being square Mars, being combust the sun, being opposite Saturn, those kinds of things, I think are much more imminently damaging, in my experience, than having the ruler of the first just be in a sign it doesn't do well in. So don't fret too much about Mars being in Cancer. The alternative would have been, if we had waited a bit to get the Taurus ruled ascendant, we would go to Venus here, who is, also in a sign she doesn't do well in Aries, but then on top of that retrograde, which is not great. I don't like rulers of the first house retrograde, and I don't like rulers of the first house in the 12th house, which would be the case if Venus were to rule the ascendant. So don't worry so much about that. Another great election opportunity for the third lunar mansion for Western Europe, North Africa. And then for the Australian version of the chart, it's actually going to be very similar to the Western European and Northern African version, because daylight saving time is going to fuck you up, is what ends up happening. So originally the chart for this was going to be like the day before with the moon in like the 11th house, but the moon wasn't quite in the third mansion yet. She was still in the second. So we had to move everything around. She didn't reach the third mansion until after she passed the midheaven, which was annoying. So we had to wait and go all the way back around until we could get the moon in the third house. The moon in the third house didn't work out. because it put Pisces on the ascendant, and that's not terrible. Pisces would point us to Jupiter, which is fine. But the issue is that Saturn is a malefic planet, and Saturn would be in Pisces in the first house, and I don't like malefics. I don't like what's my word here? Non-participating malefics in the first house. That's not a good sign. So we had to kind of do this number with the moon, kind of just barely in the third mansion. I think she leaves at like 8.5-ish degrees. I should know this. But we're going to have the moon in the first house, in the third lunar mansion. She's going to maintain the sextile with the sun. We have a nice about like 5-ish degree, 5-6-ish degree orb with the sun here, which is a really good, that's a good number for them. We're going to have Mars as the ruler of the first house. Again, not a big deal. Mars is in Cancer. Not super ideal, obviously. I'm not going to argue that, but it's not make or break. It's not a deal breaker. And at the same time, actually, I think that's it. Mars isn't afflicted by Saturn. Mars isn't combust. Mars is coming out of Mars is not retrograde any longer. And the moon and the ascendant are unafflicted by Saturn and, the Mars or anything like that. So another good option for the third lunar mansion to consider Australia. You really made me work for this one. Okay, so our second electional opportunity is going to be for the fifth lunar mansion. And the fifth lunar mansion, Alphecca, is a mansion that is associated with like wisdom, with learning, with dreams, and kind of like the psychic world, I guess would be a way to phrase it. So the fifth lunar mansion is really great for people who are trying to learn, who are trying to learn things, or trying to learn new things. I wonder if it's good for learning languages, actually. I've never actually experimented with that. Kind of a random side thought. But, anybody who is trying to learn something, anybody who's trying to like retain information, whether that is for kind of your more standard, classes, right? Like going to college, taking classes for like a degree or for some sort of certification or licensing, or even if it's just something that you're doing kind of on your own as a personal project, the fifth lunar mansion can help you out. If it's something that there's kind of another aspect of it with the fifth lunar mansion being, like I said, kind of about like the psychic world, for individuals who are interested in sort of and it's more like the psychic world. I don't know if that was really actually a great way to say it the more that I kind of reflect on it. But just sort of like the world of dreams, on dreaming, on having more lucid dream experiences, maybe potentially more prophetic or divinatory type dream experiences. The fifth lunar mansion is very helpful in kind of accessing that, and controlling that. I guess today is just me thinking random things about the fifth lunar mansion, and like I wonder if that's something you can do. Because part of me wonders if the fifth lunar mansion is good for learning languages. And then the other part of me is like, well, I wonder if the fifth lunar mansion is helpful for like people who struggle with like nightmares and night terrors. Because if the fifth lunar mansion is there to kind of help you have better dream experiences, more dream experiences where you're kind of in control of them, like lucid dreaming, then it seems like it'd be pretty easy. Like that'd be kind of an easy way to kind of address that. So let me know. Let me know in the comments if you've ever used the fifth lunar mansion for assistance in like helping with nightmares, or anything like that. I'm gonna have to remember that one as a potential solution for that next time. Anyway, but so fifth lunar mansion, good for knowledge, good for learning, good for recall, and good for lucid dreaming experiences or like divinatory experiences, or or kind of like working with like spirit visitations in dreams. Here's Lee. Hello. So the fifth lunar mansion opportunity for North America takes place on March 5th at around 10:14 in the morning. And here we're going to have the moon in the fifth mansion on the ascendant. And at this moment, she's going to be applying the conjunction with Jupiter. 10 degrees is pretty wide. With the moon, it's 6 plus, moon and Jupiter 6 plus 4. So 10, we're right within that range, which is really great. But still, 10 degrees is pretty wide. So this is another one of those like, well, the moon conjunction is kind of wide. That's not super awesome. But we have that kind of like slowing down of how we can expect the talisman to manifest. So it's not ideal, but it's not, again, a deal breaker. And that's sort of like how you have to manage a lot of these elections, or a lot of the things that are in elections. So we have the conjunction with Jupiter here, and that's fine. I like Jupiter as like a source of wisdom, of learning, about having these kinds of connections. I think Mercury is a really good planet to have the moon applied to. Wait a second. She is. I'm a dum-dum. So the moon is applying a conjunction to Jupiter, but she's actually more immediately applying the sextile to Mercury. Isn't that funny? How funny. It's like, oh, we've got this Jupiter conjunction. That's not great. You know what would be awesome? A nearly immediate aspect to Mercury. Oh, wait. Oh, no. Oh, no, we have that. So that's fun. And I guess perhaps evidence that I should take more in-depth notes about the elections when I find them instead of just like the date, time, and the ascendant degree. Perhaps I should consider that. So the moon applies a very close, very almost immediate aspect to Mercury. Mercury is a really great planet to have with the third lunar mansion, just because Mercury is also about sort of like the studiousness, the learning, the note taking, that kind of thing. I do think that we kind of lose the connection with Mercury to a certain extent with the dream world. I think that's something that we see a little bit more clearly with like Jupiter, or even with the sun if we're looking for more like prophetic or divinatory type dreams. But Mercury kind of really leaning into the like the student aspect of it all is a really great fit for people who want to apply that angle to this talisman. Mercury also rules the ascendant, with Gemini on the ascendant. And Mercury's doing fine in Aries, coming to the conjunction of this Venus, which is fine, but Mercury's not like we're past the conjunction with Saturn. We're not in a bad aspect with Mars, not yet. And we're past the combustion of the sun, so like Mercury's doing all right, kind of in this particular like eye in the storm, I guess, having moved from Saturn and kind of coming eventually to the square. Oh no, it's not going to reach the square of Mars, is it? It's going to turn retrograde in a little bit. So all in all, a nice setup for this, and Jupiter here in the first house I think is another kind of added bonus for the talisman. Benefics in the first house always make the talisman more secure, more stable in its influence and what it does, which is awesome, which is always really good to have. Another kind of secondary assistance kind of a thing. The Western European and Northern African version is going to look very, very similar, March 5th at 10:11. And same thing, we have moon in the very beginnings of the no, it's not. Yeah, kind of in the very beginnings of the fifth lunar mansion. And I'm not going to trick myself again by saying she's applying to Jupiter. She's applying the sextile to Mercury, which again, really great kind of for the studious, note-taking, learning aspect of the fifth mansion. Perhaps not so applicable to the sort of dream visitations, the dream, lucid dreaming experiences that we might associate more with like Jupiter or the sun. But don't let that talk you out of approaching the talisman that way. If that's what you're most interested in, you do have Jupiter in the first house here to kind of stabilize that and add that kind of dimension onto it. So don't be like, oh well, I guess it can't be used for that. It just may not be as effective if it was the other way around. But there's still something to be had. Mercury again, the ruler of the first house, doing fine up here, and I'm sorry, past the conjunction with Saturn, not to the square of Mars. Just dealing with this Venus lady here, I guess. The Australian version of this chart takes place on March 5th at 17:37, so about 5:30 p.m. And here we're going to have, it's going to be the most different looking, the most unique looking of the charts. And here we're going to have the moon in the fifth mansion, closer to the midheaven, still applying the sextile to Mercury. A great choice for this in regards to the fifth lunar mansion has the ability to gain knowledge and to help with learning and that kind of thing. The moon is going to rule the first house here, and we wanted to push this ascendant to be in late Cancer so we can have Mars out of the first house. But the moon is going to rule the ascendant. But the moon is going to rule the ascendant here from her exaltation of Taurus, which is really great. And we're going to have, the moon is unafflicted by Saturn, unafflicted by Mars, not combust the sun, which is great. Neither is Mercury, so the partner planet for the moon is also doing very well. And yeah, we're gonna, like I said, just this is a little bit of a kind of a different look for the fifth lunar mansion, but one that really helps us, get everything that we need to have a successful talisman. So our next electoral opportunity is going to be one that North America is not going to be able to participate in. It's going to be for Western Europe and Australia only. And Lee, would you like to tell the people about the talisman? Would you like to tell everybody about it? He says, yeah, so the next lecture opportunity we have is for the 7th. No, it's not. No, it's not, Lee. No, it's not. The next opportunity we have is for the 6th lunar mansion. And the sixth lunar mansion is a mansion that focuses primarily on relationships, more specifically romantic relationships, we would call them. For those who are looking to get kind of involved in dating or to help make a current relationship that they have that might be a little bit more casual become a little bit more serious. The sixth lunar mansion is very helpful for kind of making these connections, helping us find these people, and for sort of reinforcing those connections to be more of what we're looking for if we're looking for something a little bit more long-term and serious. There's a kind of a fun courtship aspect to the sixth lunar mansion that we can kind of lean in and utilize with that sort of magic. So I definitely recommend going to this mansion if that's something that you're currently looking for or you think you may be interested in trying to find in the near future. So for the sixth lunar mansion, the Western European and Northern African version is going to be for March 6th at 10:33 in the morning. And here we're going to have the moon in the sixth mansion on the ascendant and applying the conjunction with Jupiter. And this is why we don't have this opportunity for North America. We're not able to get the Jupiter connection to line up. By the time the moon makes it here, she's already passed this. She's already passed the Jupiter conjunction. Of course, when we think about the sixth lunar mansion and its ability to help with relationships, especially romantic ones, we probably think of Venus as the preferred planet, and that would absolutely be correct to think. Anytime you're thinking about connecting, whether it's like a romantic relationship or not, Venus is always going to be the preferred partner for the moon here. But that's not always available. As you can see, she's retrograde here, so we can't use her. But the Jupiter is a great second, very useful for making connections, be helpful and supportive. But Venus is going to be the one who really is that girl. We'll say she's really that girl. The moon's doing all right. The moon and the ascendant are doing okay. We've got the square of Saturn creeping up in about 9 degrees, which is getting a little close. But we've got this really nice buffer of the Jupiter conjunction and the Sun square afterwards. So we've got a nice buffer here with the Saturn square, but it is getting pretty close. We have to watch out for that. Mars here in Cancer is not in the way, and the Sun isn't really involved up here in Pisces. We don't have to worry about the conjunction, like the moon could join the Sun here in Pisces. Okay, Lee, just grab that. Just grab that. Just get that dot. Get that. Yeah, that's right. Get that. This is very helpful. This is extremely helpful for my work. Thank you. Is this better? Is this worse than the red dot? He hates chasing red dots because he can never catch them. He gets like visibly agitated after a while. What was I saying? My cat's adorable and trying to get involved in my work. And that's it. That's really all there is to say, I guess, about this sixth lunar mansion chart. Moon on the ascendant conjoined the Jupiter, which is a great benefic planet to have here. The malefics are out of the way, but we are getting a little bit close to the square of Saturn, so that we're going to stop here. Like this is where we're at. For the Australian version of the sixth lunar mansion, it's going to take place on March 6th at around 5:30 in the afternoon, 17:20. And here we're going to have the moon still in the fifth mansion. The sixth mansion. Now she's in the 11th house here, and she's applying the conjunction with Jupiter. So again, Venus would be our preferred planet. Oh, you know what? This isn't going to work out. We're going to have to do something. So in the chart that I have now, the chart the way I have it now, you can see the moon's at 10:27. And Venus is at 10:27. So what we're actually going to have to do is going to have to move the time up a bit. Probably just like this, to around 17:24. So wait until about 5:25 to do this. And this will give us the moon in the 11th, conjoin the 11th house cusp, and now actually really applying the conjunction with Jupiter, which is great. The moon applying the sextile to retrograde Venus would not be good. I don't like moon applications to retrograde planets. And this is kind of a thing within astrology. Retrograde planets are considered to be imbecilic. So the idea is like the moon is the planet that we go to, the one that we look towards. We say our prayers to the moon. She connects us. She brings our prayers to the planets. and then kind of facilitates that planet's powers down to us to help bring whatever our prayer is, help bring our request into fruition. So the moon carries that message forward and gives it to the planet she applies to next. In planetary talismans, you always want this planet to be the one that the talisman is for. So if you're making like a Mercury talisman, you want the moon to apply to Mercury because you want that planet to get your prayers and to be the one that like creates the thing that does this stuff for you. That's why you're making a Mercury talisman in the first place. With lunar mansions and fixed stars, it's a little bit different. Here we're looking for a planet that can accomplish the business. And so a lot of times we're looking for a planet that is thematically similar. That's sort of our first pass, which is why, like, usually Venus is thematically similar, a planet that can accomplish the business in a relationship type talisman like the sixth lunar mansion. But when she's retrograde, she's imbecilic. So it's like she can't do it. Like she's got other things going on. She is incapable at this point of bringing it into fruition in a way that lasts, in a way that is good, and in a way that is helpful. So that's really our issue that we have with retrograde planets, and is why you don't have the moon applied to a retrograde planet. It's just the idea that like it is incapable of fulfilling the business right now. So you need to go to a different planet who is more focused on forward progress, whereas retrograde planets are usually focused on like revisiting or resting. So there are situations where applications to retrograde planets are useful in elections, but probably not for this one. So we have our Jupiter connection here. And the moon is going to rule the first house because Cancer is on the ascendant, and the moon's doing all right. She's not afflicted by Saturn. I'm sorry, she's not afflicted by Mars. We're about 11 degrees out from the square of Saturn, and we still have the conjunction with Jupiter and the square of the Sun to go through first. So a good kind of buffer zone there, but we are going to have to be more careful here, and that's why there's not like a seventh lunar mansion talisman, because the square to Saturn interferes. So our next electional opportunity is going to be for the 11th lunar mansion. And the 11th lunar mansion is a mansion that is primarily focused on like career success, whether that's through promotion or through the idea of like renegotiating a higher paying salary, or anything like that. That's kind of more the idea for the 11th lunar mansion. And the 11th lunar mansion has kind of an interesting intersection of powers that I think makes it especially suited for that, in a way that I don't think you would really get the same benefits from like if you were self-employed. So like me, I have a hard time really using the 11th lunar mansion, because like the 11th lunar mansion is like making more money and having people in power, like in positions of authority, be nice to you. So it's really helpful for like getting a better position from like your boss, or getting a higher wage, like negotiating a better wage or a better salary or better payment from said boss, from said like superior. And that's a little bit more difficult to like utilize in more self-employed situations, or like business ownership, especially if you like buy and sell, like if you sell goods, if you're primarily like retail. The 11th lunar mansion is a little bit harder to utilize. There are better mansions for you. But if you're looking for a job, if you're looking to get, if you're looking for like a different job, or to move up in the company, or to move into like a different tier of like responsibility, or like income, the 11th lunar mansion is very helpful for that. So looking at our election for North America, this takes place on March 10th at 10:22 a.m. And this one I really had to work for. I'll let you know that. This one I really had to work for. And here we've got the moon in the 11th mansion in the third house. Ideally, we would like the moon in the first, in the 10th, or in the 11th houses, but the third house is a good kind of final option as the house of the moon's joy. So the moon has kind of a special relationship with this house, that even though it is a cadent house and one that we tend to not really prefer, we can go here to get a kind of unique situation where the moon is powerful. So the moon's here in the third house in the 11th lunar mansion, and she's applying the sextile with Jupiter here in the ascendant. And Jupiter, of course, is going to be a planet that's going to want, stability. That's going to bring us stability. That's going to bring us opportunities for growth, and a place where we can kind of explore that growth in a positive way. and that is really kind of the energy that we're riding here. Connections with the sun are also good here. Connections with Venus are also good here. And even connections with like Mercury, Mars, and Saturn can be good here if the position or the career that you're involved in is mercurial, Saturnian, or martial in some way. Like if it is like some sort of planetary themed appropriate, then that would be great, kind of like on an individual basis. But these three planets, especially like the Sun and Jupiter, are going to be sort of like generally applicable for most things. We're going to have Mercury as the ruler of the first house here at 8 degrees of Aries, and Mercury's slowing down. We're getting to a slow down period, so I think after this we're not going to use Mercury ascendants anymore. Yeah, this seems to be the last one that's a Mercury ascendant. But Jupiter in the first house and Jupiter being the moon's next connection are very helpful, very positive, very giving. It's a very good position for Jupiter to be in, especially in a chart where Mercury is kind of starting to break down. So it's nice to have that. But the moon is unafflicted by Mars or Saturn. Mercury is unafflicted by Mars or Saturn. We're just kind of having to deal with the slowdown process. A planet that is slowing down is fine to work with. Again, we're just kind of adding into it the idea that like this talisman is probably going to take longer to see things happen with it. But when we get to retrograde, we don't want that. Stationing or retrograde, we're not super interested in outside of very specific contexts. And then the Western European, Northern African version of the 11th Lunar Mansion chart is going to have the moon in the midheaven in the 11th mansion, which is more ideally where we like to see her for this kind of situation. She's still applying the sextile to Jupiter, which is very good. Jupiter is going to be that force that gives us a stable environment to grow, to be able to experience that growth, whether that's career growth or financial growth, which is really great. And you can expect a kind of an easier transition into the next stage, we'll say, of whatever that career is, whatever that promotion is. It's probably going to be an easy transition, or kind of like when you get there, things are chill and fine. Mars is going to rule the first house here, over here in Cancer. Again, don't worry about Mars being in fall. That's not a big deal. What would be more concerning if Mars was like square Saturn, retrograde, combust, that kind of thing. And none of that's going on. Thankfully, Mars has ceased its retrograde motion and will now be able to move through. Everybody who has stuff in Cancer is like, yay. Everybody who has stuff in Leo, ooh. So, it takes all kinds. That's what we're going to say. Everybody goes through it. Me next. But everything's looking good with this. It would be great if Jupiter or a benefic planet were in the ascendant here as sort of an additional buffer, which I think is what makes the previous election a little bit better than this one. Though we have the moon in a more advantageous position, we lose the benefic in the first house, which we can often use as an interchange. You don't always need the moon to be well placed if you can get a benefic in the first house. A little trick there. Though, of course, you always want both. But the benefic in the first house is often a way to make up for the moon being in a house that she doesn't do super well in, for instance. So fun pro tip when you're crafting your own elections.
Hey team, so it was already getting kind of late and Lee and I were tired, so we decided to go to bed. But we're back now to finish up. Well, I'm back now. According to Lee's schedule, he is currently sleeping in a sunbeam, so he's got some very busy work to do. Very important work to do, and we're gonna, give him our best to complete that very important assignment. But carrying on from where we left off, our next election opportunity is going to be for a Sirius fixed star talisman. This is going to be for Western Europe and Northern Africa. And Sirius is a fixed star in Canis Major, the alpha star of Canis Major, and it's a star that is focused on getting favors from people in authority, weather, magic, spirits of the air, connections with spirits and daimon, and repairing relationships. So really great. It's a really great sort of like relationship reinforcement for any kind of relationship that might be strained or going through a distance, like some sort of distance, emotional, physical, whatever. And really great as a way to kind of like get people to work with you in that way. And of course, like I said, good also for weather magic. There's been a lot of interesting experiments, I guess, or outcomes involved in that. But looking at our chart, like I said, this is going to be for Western Europe and North Africa. It's going to be set for March 8th at just before 1 p.m. at 12:51. And here we're going to have the moon applying to the conjunction of Sirius. Sirius is at 14 degrees Cancer and 14 minutes. So we want to have that degree, at least 14 degrees of Cancer on the ascendant, with the moon being able to apply to it very closely. And then after that, she's more immediately applying the conjunction with Mars. And so Sirius is a star that's of the nature of Jupiter and Mars. So you would want the moon to either be applying to Jupiter or to Mars. And so in this instance, normally we don't want Mars to be on the ascendant or on the first house. But because Mars is like invited to the party, it's fine for Mars to be here. Mars has like a contextual reason to be here. So that's what we want. At the same time, the moon's not afflicted by Saturn, not afflicted by Mars, because she can't be afflicted by Mars because he's the planet that we're after. And yeah, everything looks pretty promising for this one. So make sure to grab this star talisman if this is one that's been on your list for some time. Our next opportunity is going to be for North America and Australia. Western Europe and North Africa are not going to be able to participate in this one. And this is going to be for a Regulus fixed star talisman. So we get to kind of close out with a few fixed star talismanic opportunities, which is fun. And Regulus, of course, is a star in the constellation of Leo. And its powers are primarily focused on like countering the melancholic humor. That's one of the big ones. And melancholy is a big sort of complex, I guess, disease condition that affects both physical and mental health issues, ranging from like depression and anxiety are big ones, kind of on the mental health side. And then, various forms of indigestion or chronic disease are sort of more on the physical health side of it. But in general, Regulus has a healthful aura to it. It helps you become healthy, helps you preserve health. So there's like a big kind of health undercurrent, regardless of if there's a kind of melancholic cause. It tends to, it is kind of like the antidote for melancholy, we'll say, but can be helpful for various sorts of health conditions as well. So often really good to go to for that. And then, of course, it grants, honors and favors. So again, we have this idea of like honors and assistance from people in authority. It's a very common theme throughout the text in astrological magic, just because of the sort of society that a lot of these texts were written in, which were kind of like borderline feudal, I guess we'll say. So like, that kind of thing, that kind of system. And not that we don't have a borderline feudal system today as well, right? Like, let's be real. But the idea of like granting honors and favors from royalty or people in authority sounds very old-timey. But there are very real applications to this today, because there are a lot of people who are authorities over various aspects of life, even if you don't necessarily think of them that way. So something to keep in mind when working with these, or when thinking about what kind of talismans you might want, or kind of like making some of these talismans that have kind of weird descriptions a little bit more applicable. But looking at our election for North America, it takes place on March 11th at around 11 o'clock at night, or it's at 22:53 is what this chart is set for. And here we're going to have Regulus is at 0 degrees Virgo, so we want to get that degree either on the ascendant or on the midheaven. And here we have it on the midheaven. The moon is applying to the conjunction of that degree, and at the same time, she's applying this square to Jupiter. And so this is kind of my like, I'll offer this one as an option, as like a Regulus option. But this square is like 15 degrees apart, which is pretty wide for a Moon-Jupiter conjunction. The Moon and Jupiter are 6 + 4, so about 10 degrees is what I would consider them to be an orb. So this isn't quite an orb, but this is the Moon's next aspect. And when it comes to Regulus, Regulus is a star that's of the nature of Jupiter and Mars, so we want a Jupiter or a Mars contact. And Regulus Regulus and the Moon with the Jupiter contact is really good. So there's a lot of good to be had with this election, but we do have that sort of consideration to be mindful of the wider the aspect between the moon and the next planet she has to contact, the longer, like the more we have to work at the talisman, the longer it takes for the talisman to start to take effect. So just something to be mindful of. It's not what I would call like an ideal, like this isn't like a perfect Regulus election, but it's coming up and it's one, and maybe you need it. So here you go. The ruler of the first house, because Scorpio's on the ascendant, is going to be Mars here in Cancer. Not a big deal. Mars isn't afflicted by Saturn. Mars isn't combust of the sun. The ascendant degree is also not afflicted by Saturn or combust the sun. And yeah, just a kind of your standard checking all the boxes, Regulus talismanic collection. For the Australian version, it's going to take place on March 12th at 1844. And here, basically the same thing, just with our orientation slightly different. We're going to have 0 degrees Virgo, the degree of the fixed star Regulus, on the ascendant here, with the moon applying to the degree of the ascendant, and still that square to Jupiter here in Gemini. Again, the aspect is now about 14 degrees apart, so a tiny bit closer than it was in the North American version, but still more than the 10 degrees that we kind of want. And then even closer still, 10 degrees is just like the where we kind of stop worrying about it, but even closer would be better. The ruler of the first house, of course, is going to be Mercury as the ruler of Virgo, and Mercury's doing okay. We're getting closer to the square of Mars. This is probably about as close as I would want to get to it. And Mercury is about to station retrograde. We're moving pretty slowly. I think we've got like a degree and a half-ish to go before we hit that retrograde point. So after this, we won't be going to Mercury. So this is kind of like our last hurrah, our last option for Mercury for this time period until we get until it stations direct again. But all in all, even with some of these hiccups, like I said, this isn't a sort of perfect or ideal Regulus fixed star talisman, but it is an option coming up for those who might need one. And then our last electional opportunity is going to be for the 18th Lunar Mansion. And this is a mansion that is also focused on healing, but a little bit more aggressively. The 18th Lunar Mansion is one that I like to go to for help with like people who are going to go through surgery. I think the 18th Lunar Mansion is very helpful for, or through fighting like infections or things like that. There's sort of like this kind of predatory idea with the 18th Lunar Mansion. The image is like of a snake. And so how the talisman seems to work best is this idea of like it goes in and kind of consumes the illness or whatever it is as a problem. And so I think it works better for these sort of more like where you can point to sort of like an invader of some kind, like an infection or, like I said, like a surgery works. We have to go in and kind of take something out. And that way, I think the 18th Lunar Mansion works very well in that's sort of like its main healing modality. And because of that, I wouldn't really recommend it just sort of like as a preventative, like kind of to have around and kind of keep you safe kind of a thing. Like I said, as sort of like a method of preventative medicine. I'm not sure it works super well for that. I don't necessarily think there's anything wrong or there's anything dangerous per se about trying it that way. But I've noticed that the people who have the best, like the most obvious, the best stories about the 18th Lunar Mansion are those who like were sick when they made it and got better, or like, had a very successful, very easy breezy surgery kind of situation, which is awesome. Those, I'm not going to take that away from anybody. That's great. But it's probably not super applicable to kind of everybody, and that's fine. With their 28 lunar mansions, they all kind of have slightly different ways of doing similar roles, and it's just finding the right ones that work for us based on what we're after, what we need, that kind of thing. So our 18th lunar mansion is going to be available for Western Europe, Australia, and North America, so everybody's going to get it. But it's a little bit different in the North American version, so we're going to cover that one last. But for Western Europe, Western Europe and North Africa, this takes place on March 18th, just before midnight, 23:28. And here we're going to have the moon in the 18th mansion on the ascendant, and she's going to be applying a very tight, a very close trine with Mars, which is great. Mars, I think, is a good planet for the 18th lunar mansion. Like I said, it's kind of got that surgical aspect to it. It's got that kind of predatory aspect to it. So I think the kind of Mars, I think it is very like Mars in Scorpio. Just kind of that like that sort of energy of kind of like waiting and striking when it's right, kind of a thing. I think that fits the Mars aspect of this very well, and I like having Mars connections when I can with this talisman. Mars is unafflicted by Saturn or the Sun. The moon is unafflicted by Saturn or the Sun, and so is the ascendant. So it's just kind of like a very straightforward kind of thing. And yeah, just a good option for that. A really nice way to utilize this Moon Mars trine and the mutual reception that it conveys. The Australian version is very similar. This takes place on March 18th at 21:28. Again, Scorpio on the ascendant, the moon in the mansion, applying the trine to Mars. It's not as tight, of course, as it was with the Western European version, which is unfortunate. But it's still a really good connection. We still have the mutual reception between the two planets. They're both still unafflicted. And just a really great option. I don't know, just it's good. It's a good one. Of course, not as good as like had Mars been in Scorpio and she could join him there. That'd be great too. But maybe next time. Maybe eventually. Maybe when Mars comes around here towards the autumn, we'll be able to get something like that. Oh, actually, now that I say that, at that point, it would probably just be like a Mars talisman, right? So I don't know. But speaking of dual use elections, that's the Western, or that's what's a little bit different about the North American version. So on the one hand, we do have the 18th Lunar Mansion set up. We have the moon in the mansion on the ascendant, applying that trine to Mars. It's further out than it's 9 degrees out, so much further out than it was for the Western European version or for the Australian version. But we still have that connection. It's still the next one. It's still a good connection to have for this. Alternatively, this could also be for an Alphecca fixed star talisman. So Alphecca is a star in the Northern Crown constellation. It sits at 12 degrees of Scorpio. So if we can get 12 degrees Scorpio on the ascendant, get the moon to apply to the conjunction to that, while also applying to a planet to whom shares the nature of Alphecca, like Mars. Alphecca is a star that's of the nature of Venus and Mars, so you would want one of those two planets. And now we have Mars here. Being able to do that, we can have an Alphecca fixed star talisman. An Alphecca is a star that is more focused on socializing. It's more focused on socializing, on creating lasting friendships, helping to overcome social anxieties, helping to ease social issues. It's a very powerful star when it comes to kind of cultivating community, finding friends in a place where, especially now where we kind of have this kind of chronic issue of isolation and loneliness, the loneliness epidemic, they call it. Alphecca, I think, is a very powerful star to make sure that you can, overcome that. You can find these connections with these people that are out there, whether they're in your local community or, across the world, just somewhere to connect with and have not just a friendship, but like a good friendship that is, meaningful to you and supportive of you and helpful to you. So Alphecca is a really great star for that. It's one that I think gets slept on a lot. I don't think a lot of people think of, because a lot of people are like, oh, astrological magic, I could have health or wealth or, this other thing. Why would I want friends? Like, what's that about? Who would want that? But I like Alphecca. I think it's a good one. I think it's a really great star. So I definitely recommend it to anybody who, just wants more, connections with people, or to kind of find their tribe sort of situation. It's a very good star for that. But all right, everybody, that's all I have for you today for our Pisces New Moon. A good amount of options to go through, and hopefully this trend will continue as we move through the spring into the summer. Now that Mars has stationed direct and Jupiter's direct, we just have to kind of wait a bit for Mercury and Venus to catch up, to go through their retrograde phases before we kind of have everybody on board to work with, which should make things a little bit easier. Oh, another date I did want to point out, though. Did I write it down? Yeah. Another date that I did want to point out was March 12th is the Saturn Cazimi. So that's the conjunction of the Sun and Saturn. And planetary Cazimis are usually times where I recommend people who are thinking about beginning a remediation practice with a particular planet to kind of start on that date. So if you have been thinking about, or, if you've noticed that you struggle a lot with Saturnian type topics or Saturnian things in your life, then I would recommend using the Cazimi period as a way to kind of start that process of starting over, creating a blank slate. The idea of planets coming to the conjunction of the sun is that they return their light to the sun and then are given sort of a new spark to start their next planetary cycle, their next synodic cycle over again. And we can kind of dive into that as well with these Cazimis to create an environment where we kind of leave behind some of those past events that kind of create a bias around or hinder our ability to connect with a planet in a healthy way. So think about how you might want to do that if that's something that you want to do. It's also a good opportunity to clean any Saturn type talismans or like ancestor altars or like altars to the dead or any sort of Saturnian type tool that you have. Cazimis, I think I like to utilize Cazimis for their cleaning and their cleansing properties. So I often will like clean tools or talismans that I associate with the planet during that time. Just a way to kind of keep it clean, keep it up, because that happens for at least once a year for every planet. And it's like kind of an easy way to kind of keep on top of things. But that's all that I had for you today for our Pisces New Moon. Make sure to go check out the Patreon if any of that sounds interesting to you. The Ficino Fridays, the additional videos that YouTube fights me about posting here, and then other content as well. But everybody take care, and I will see you all again for our Aries Solar Eclipse. God have mercy on our souls.